Hey, this is Jake with the Tattoo Improvement Network, and this is a brand new segment called Tattoo Technique. I hope you enjoy. Alright guys, thought we'd do a quick tutorial on designing and drawing tattoos to fit large spaces. I'm going to hand draw a full sleeve over the next couple of days here, and I thought I'd just show you just how rough my original drawing is. It's basically just kind of the general shape of an arm, and all I'm trying to determine are my lights and my darks. I'm really not worried about any detail whatsoever because that's going to come as the tattoo develops. So I'm just kind of thinking about what the main elements are, where my darkest darks are, where my lightest lights are, and how it's going to move with the flow of the arm, which is always the biggest, always the most important part of it, is making sure you're drawing to the space. So super rough sketch right here on the arm so far, and we're just going to kind of go back through and start refining. I'm just going to go with a darker marker each time and just start repeating the shapes that I want, getting rid of the shapes that I don't. This is I can wipe marker off, I can put it back in, whatever I need to do, but I'm always trying to think of, I want these big sweeping kind of marks. I know we're moving down onto his hand. I'm going to start with kind of a tight spiral, I know that, and I'm going to break a little bit of light and dark up on his forearm, and then have my darkest darks is this kind of rooty tree and these leaves that are kind of liquefying a little bit, so I'm starting to rough those things in. And I want to keep in mind that throughout this tattoo I'm trying to think of, like, I want these big shapes to kind of dominate. So I want to follow the contours of his arm. Sometimes I'll play against them. I'll intentionally mark against those contours, but I'm always keeping in mind that I want the contours to, I want the shapes to kind of to work like so. And so, I'm going to have a large kind of leaf here, a large kind of leaf here that'll be bold in the foreground, and then lighter, more kind of psychedelic stuff going on in the background, which we'll get to tomorrow. Where our focus today is going to be this lower area. I'm just going to draw for a minute. Always kind of thinking also about these little, a lot of little things I always keep in mind. This little bone that has a tendency to like distort things. So a lot of times if I'm doing something like a spiral, I'll make a negative shape around there just to keep from having to work directly over the top of it, or at the very least I'll address it. Another thing, especially on guys that are a little more muscular, you'll find this area, this muscle right here will tend to distort shapes sometimes. So I try to keep it in mind as well. And I'll draw, like, I've kind of wrapped right around it with this tree shape, so I use it as a breaking point. You don't have to do that. It's just a couple of things that I always kind of am trying to think of. Another thing I'll do is try to avoid knuckles because they don't tend to hold that well, so I'll use some type of a negative shape, like in this case will be a petal or two that kind of wrap around the knuckles. I know it looks like a disaster right now, but you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. Alright, so I'm just mapping out space, and you can tell, we're going here, you can tell that I'm getting a little darker each time. We're making a few more decisions, so I'm going to go back with something a little bolder and start to actually lay it in. This will be my last pass before I start with the machine. So I'll really start to refine it a little more now. All I'm establishing here are just like, these aren't lines that I really necessarily care about being exact. I just am establishing the flow that I want. The chances of my lines ending up in these specific spots are probably pretty slim. I just want them to be in the general vicinity and going in the right direction. Alright, so that's basically where I'm going to leave it to start tattooing. That's it. And that's how far my goal today is to get all of this line and as much color done in it as possible, as much shading and color done in it as we possibly can. And you can see it's super rough. There's not a clean line in it, and I just don't care about that. We're gonna make it. We're gonna treat it like a painting. We're working general to specific. So these lines right here are just super washy. They're barely anything. They're mostly water, because this is going to be a really bright point where the leaves all around it, the petals around it will be dark, and this will be light. So I really, these lines are such a general guide. They don't mean much of anything. I want them to almost go away, really. Alright, so I'll go swipe this down. I just want to kind of make a point of how, if you look at these lines, I started shading a little bit. I'm just kind of getting my darkest darks in, so I'm establishing my light source. But if you kind of zip through here, you'll see just how scratchy these lines are. I mean, there's really no consistency to any of them. They're single pass, and for the most part, some of them may even move around a little bit. I may build some up, let other ones go away, but there's nothing. There's no finish line in this entire thing, and there won't be until all the color goes in. I may make another pass or two as we're doing color, but for the most part, the lines will be the last thing I really concern myself with. So I'm gonna keep shading, and I'm just establishing my darkest darks. I'm using solid black. I'm using a big mag, a big configuration. I'm using this big configuration even in these tiny leaves and things down through here, because what it does is it forces me to work in a general way and not to go into detail too early. And I know I have a problem doing that. So as big of a needle configuration as I can get away with, I will use. And right now I'm just trying to establish my darkest darks. Alright, so I'm getting some darks established here. I'm kind of just identifying my light source, where my light's kind of hitting, what these leaves are actually going to do, how they're going to liquefy, or whatever you call it, this that they're doing. And so I'm going to start to introduce a little bit of color now. I've got enough information on there. And now if this were, I didn't mention, but this is a tattoo that Chad here has traveled. He flew in to get tattooed just for 2 straight days. So I'm going to approach this tattoo a little bit differently than I would some. If I were just working on this one time and I was going to be finished, I probably would have lined the entire arm and then just done black. Because we're breaking it into 2 days in a row, I don't want to line the whole arm and then come back around and start working back into really tender areas. So I found a stopping point for today. Tomorrow I'm going to lay all of this stuff in and work just on it. So I'm not working back and forth. The only problem there's going to be like I'll have to be aware of where I'm wiping into today's work. So I'm approaching it a little bit differently. I'm going to go ahead and get into some color right now and just start introducing that a little bit. was our stopping point for day one. This is as far as we made it, which is about where I was hoping to get. Let me know if you liked this tutorial, if you want me to do more of these, or if you would rather us just stick to podcasting. Make sure to subscribe below, leave comments, go to firesidetats.com, sign up for our mailing list. Thanks.